The host of Joe's Great Books is Joe Sharkey. He teaches at the University of Washington, Tacoma, but is not speaking for or sponsored by the UW. Pedro Domingos, thank you very much for being willing to spend some time with me on my fledgling podcast. It's very fun for me to talk about your new book. And I was just telling you I had to get my notes ready because the main experience I had in reading it was just being alerted over and over again to how much I didn't know and how much I want to know. And so I actually, dove into a lot of different things and tried to do my homework. And in addition to reading your book, as you know, I've been following you on Twitter for some period of time. And that's one thing I highly recommend people do if they have any interest in things AI or tech or just kind of terse, clever commentary. Your gnomic in your tweets, they're always very, very short, but they always make a really incisive point. And that's the kind of thing, well, that's the kind of thinking I imagine serves you very well as a computer scientist, but it also served you well clearly as a novelist. And that's what we're going to talk about in a minute, your satirical novel of all things AI and a good handful of things political, especially presidential, US presidential political 2040. But if you don't mind, we maybe should begin with just a little bit of an introduction to you. I imagine that of the small select, the elite that follow my podcast, many of them are as inexperienced as I am in AI, and so they may not know who you are. But let me just read off some key facts, and then you can embellish and tell me anything else you want us to know. But you're born in Lisbon, in Portugal. That's where you got your early schooling. Came to the States and got your PhD. And what was the degree? Was it in, it looked like on Wikipedia, you have a Wikipedia page, so we're among, this is a very famous person we're talking about, a Wikipedia page. What was the degree in your doctorate?
It was in computer science, and very specifically, it was in AI, and even more specifically in machine learning.
Oh, really? Okay, so very specific. So you got your job at UW Seattle in 1999. One interesting fact I didn't know about you was that you started at least if Wikipedia is telling the truth, that you started a machine learning research group at the hedge fund D.E. Shaw and Company in 2018 and left in 2019. When we get to your book, maybe you could tell us if that informed any of the satire. In 2015, as I think you said of yourself in a different podcast, I watched the Silicon Valley Investors Club podcast. That was very fun, but dazzling to me because you all three of you knew things I didn't know. And so I was just kind of along for the ride. And then I went back to Econ Talk, I think from probably 2015, where you were talking about The Master Algorithm, a book subtitled How the Quest for the Ultimate Learning Machine Will Remake Our World. And I didn't have a chance to read that one, but it's definitely on my list. I mentioned your Twitter account. And I should also mention the way you and I got to know each other was by a kind of informal group of professors at the tri-campus of the University of Washington. Most people don't know that there are two other campuses, right? So the main one, the mothership, the one with the football team, that's where Pedro works in Seattle. People who watch the show know I work at UW Tacoma. And so there are people that just kind of email and occasionally meet very informally, kind of inspired by Heterodox Academy, the national group that just thinks that the academic world has become so monolithic and orthodox that we need some heterodoxy. So I've met some very interesting people in that group, and one of them is Pedro. But the reason we're doing our podcast today is your super fun short satirical novel, 2040. there's a subtitle for the novel, right?
Yeah, a Silicon Valley satire.
Silicon Valley Satire. So with 2040, I was impressed that a guy who I think you described yourself in one of those podcasts as, look, I'm a computer scientist. I'm not a novelist. Now, I want to come back to that because I think the way you put it, I forget exactly. I was something like I'm more of an analyst, do analytical thinking more than what synthetic thinking, I think might have been the contrast. But you obviously got the both sides going. The synthetic side is at work too. And I was impressed with how fun it was, and I thought how well constructed it was. The plot I thought was fun. It's a satire, and so I don't know if you've called your novel a comedy of errors, but use that term many times in describing the way the AI industry has developed or kind of gotten lucky. So I'm sure you see that in spades in the novel, especially if you are more in tune with those things than I am. But as you point out, the novel is written kind of for two audiences. One is for people who are experts or at least follow AI in the industry and computer science carefully. And they are going to get all kinds of inside jokes that I missed, I can tell. But I still can get the humor for a lot of it, even if I can't pin it up or connect it to someone in the real world. Just to give the premise, Pedro dives in, just as his mentor Aristotle recommends, in medias res, that is right into the middle of things, just before it starts to get good. And we're already just at the moments before the first big debate in the presidential race between still the Democrats and the Republicans. The parties have survived. It's 2040. And the Republican candidate is Prezibot, some form of AI. And then his Democratic opponent is John Raging Bull. Now, part of the fun, we'll go through it because you give a kind of a cheat sheet, like a key to the characters in your Twitter feed, and I'll post that picture so people can look at it. The kind of the intrigue of the story is that we eventually learn that neither candidate is all that he seems to be. Prezibot is actually not quite autonomous. He's a CEO of the company that made him, which I believe I'm pronouncing it right, is Kumb AI, which is a play on Kumbaya, right? You make that explicit later in the book. I was happy that I got that right. His name is Ethan Bernswagger, which is great, and his real life counterpart is Sam Altman, right? So there's something like an OpenAI spoof. There's another character, Arvind Subramanian, who is the CTO of Kumbaya, and he's Ilya Sutskever, which is, I probably pronounced that name incorrectly, but I didn't know about Ilya until you pointed him out. So that's the kind of real basic information that I'm getting. I know that for people in computer science, or at least I'm sure everybody knows exactly who all these characters are. But same is true of the other candidate, which is Raging Bull, who presents himself relentlessly as a Lakotan warrior. But it turns out that he has exactly the same amount of Lakotan DNA as Elizabeth Warren, which is 1,024th, right? And as she says, and I have the DNA test to prove it with no iron.
Just like she did.
Just like she did. I mean, if it was a multimedia book, then you could have had the video, because she recorded the video, just happened to have the video going when she received this phone call, and was so touched and stunned to realize how thoroughly American Indian she was. But one of the fun things about it is that you don't just satirize one side of the political spectrum, one end of it. And I mean, after all we have nowadays are ends, or at least it seems that way. Like that's one reason we're in that heterodox group. We like to have both ends talk. We like to have the middle when the middle is appropriate, but you often mix and match of foolishness from the far left with foolishness from the far right. So John Raging Bull, as you tell us in your character key, is actually a figure for Donald Trump. He's just a very different version. He's kind of a DEI version of Donald Trump, right? If Donald Trump had decided to run for the Democratic Party. So other characters that show up, Mira Murati, Emma Zong is her name in the book. Dave Newwald in the book is Mark Zuckerberg in real life. He's CEO of HappyNet, which is a great name. And you seem to have a special place in your heart, or maybe some other organ, for Mark Zuckerberg, based on how he turns out.
No, I mean, I'm sure you're saying that sarcastically. And, just to clarify, every one of these characters is a composite. So Mark Newell in particular, sorry, Dave Newell, interesting slip of the tongue there. he's not only based on Mark Zuckerberg, but more than anybody else is like Mark Zuckerberg. And, without giving any spoilers, he does get his comeuppance at the end. I don't think it's because he's evil or deserves to be punished or something, but he is, making some mistakes, which I am warning the real Mark he may be making as well.
Yeah, good clarification. These are all composites, and so the character key is just like a strong dose of this, a strong
Yeah.
dose of that. But like we said about Raging Bull, he's like on the extreme left and the extreme right, at least in so far as he's inspired by a couple of people from those neighborhoods.
Each of these characters, I could say there's a primary inspiration and then maybe a secondary one.
Yeah.
The primary inspiration for Raging Bull is Donald Trump, but the secondary one is Fidel Castro.
Oh, okay. I did not pick up on that, but that makes sense.
So his personality is the personality of Donald Trump,
Yeah.
but he's a left-wing populist,
Right.
which a lot of people in America don't quite grok. But again, that's part of what I'm trying to do here is like people in Latin America, for example, know very well that populists can come in both colors, right? And Fidel Castro was this, guerrilla leader, which again, Raging Bull styles himself a guerrilla leader. And so a lot of the elements, so in a way, Raging Bull is a crossover between a Lakota warrior and the guerrilla chief,
I see. Yeah. Well,
right?
that fits perfectly. Yeah. Right. Well, and he does have a moment that is very January 6th. I guess it's happened before well, there's one that happened before we begin, and then there's one that happens as things heat up toward the end, right? And I'm sure that's not just January 6th. It's any kind of, insurrection or attack,
Well,
right?
interestingly, and this is like another funny thing, is that that scene where there's a riot was conceived before January 6th.
Ah, is that right?
Because I really conceived this book in 2020, and then I wrote it in early 2020, et cetera, et cetera. And my worry was that, this is a riot, but it's kind of a right-wing riot. And I don't know if people will, this was the summer of George Floyd and whatnot. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know if people will get this idea that could be a right-wing riot. And then January 6th just completely solved that problem for me. And in fact, at part of why I decided I just had better, publish the book is that a lot of things in it keep coming true. So
Yeah.
there are spoofs happen in reality. So I'm like, I should publish this before it's outdated,
I
before
did
it's all happened.
I did notice that, and I wanted to ask you if, when that happened, when you conceived of this and when you conceived of that. So you essentially predicted January 6th. Were there other fun parts that showed up that you predicted or you wrote in advance?
Oh, there's a whole series of them. Many of them, or maybe most of them, to do with AI, right? And the things that have happened in
Ah,
AI. When I started writing this novel, and when I wrote most of it, actually, there was no ChatGPT.
you're
But the
kidding.
novel is ChatGPT runs for president, except
Oh,
that I
wow.
had to explain to people there's this chatbot, and now this whole thing is like everybody's daily life, right? So in
Yeah.
a way, the whole plot, the whole character of Prezibot and whatnot, when I started writing this novel, they were a little bit, far, in advance of where the world was, but not anymore. These days, I just say to people, the plot of the novel is ChatGPT runs for president, and they immediately get it and start laughing.
Oh my God, that's great. I didn't realize that it was conceived that far back. So it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
the whole thing is oracular. That's really fun. Wow, well, you must be
We'll
proud.
see. We'll see from now on what happens. I'm a little nervous, but yeah.
Well, I mean, there's one thing that I want to get to is that it's approaching the climax, and it's the way the tech evolves. And I mean, the Prezibot is the candidate early on, Prezibot 1.0, and there's a point in which they
Yeah.
make the transition to Prezibot 2.0. And at that point, I thought, now that's not a sly commentary on the substitution of Harris for Biden, is it? But that surely came a long time before we got this, and that would have been a more subtle allusion than you usually do. Usually, you have fun making it fairly plain, but that was just a coincidence too, right?
That was a coincidence, but honestly, there have also been a bunch of coincidences like that. And
Yeah,
the thing is, when you're in the zone where a certain kind of implausible thing happens,
Yeah.
At some point, things just, maybe not, it's not entirely an accident that that could happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's this, I mean, like, part of the joke in the story is that President, while being an AI, has a lot of the same issues in terms of, its aids, managing it and where it can go wrong. Like, it can hallucinate, but politicians can also go off track, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
this late replacement of one version of president for another is not wasn't about Biden and Harris, but like, we could see the fact that Biden might be replaced coming, right? And
Yeah.
but there's also a deeper point in there, which is what is the ideal candidate and what is the ideal AI candidate? And
Yeah.
the difference between President 1.0 and President 2.0 is that President 1.0 really is just ChatGPT in a robot body, right? It generates text, often
Right.
surprisingly good, sometimes not so. But really, what happens in the novel is that Ethan, who's the protagonist, the CEO of the startup that made President, he goes through this series of misadventures that make him realize that what you really need is something else. And
Yeah.
so President What 2.0 is really, for all the satirical part of the novel, is my own prediction of where AI is going and needs to go. So that part hasn't happened yet, but I think it's going to.
So let's talk about that. Tell me if I get it right. As you put it, Prezibot 1.0, and at the beginning of the novel, one of my favorite parts is just that initial debate, because Prezibot is so witty and so clever and so terse, and immediately comes back with zingers during the debate. And one kind of consistent defense over the course, not just of the debate, but of the whole novel, is someone will say, well, what if he glitches or something along those lines? And he says, so what? Humans do too. And that's the kind of thing that seems like it's just
Exactly.
perfectly inspired by Biden's flop in the first debate. And you clearly wrote that before that happened. So then,
And again, I mean, like, this, I mean, you can't make this stuff up, but like, so the first debate happens, right? And President is doing really well, as you pointed out, but Ethan is really nervous because he knows that chatbots hallucinate like everybody does now. Who knows what it's going to say? But again, part of the joke here, and at some point this is made explicit in the novel, is that someone like Biden has the same problem. If you're one of Biden's aides, you're on tenterhooks wondering, what is he going to say that I'm going to have to walk back, and what disasters it's going to cause? So in a way, Prezibot is an AI, but in another way, he's really standing in for real politicians and the problems that they cause.
right. And one of the things that nobody knows except for Ethan and Arvind, and maybe what Emma is, Ethan has a kill switch where he can turn
Yeah,
off and he can speak through him just like through a microphone. And that becomes, like the kill switch at some point becomes like the MacGuffin of the story, the thing everybody is
exactly.
so they have to get, although what this MacGuffin is. But at this stage, Prezibot is just, as one character later calls it, a glorified chatbot.
Yeah,
But Prezibot 2.0 is something, I think maybe one character called it something like a crowdsourced intelligence, where he will
yeah,
take questions, and then he, with his super fast computer brain, will process millions. I think at one point there are 5 million people sending him suggested responses, and they test it out, and it works wonderfully. And he comes up with not just pithy and terse answers, but some policies that, at least in part, struck me often as wise. And there's a point at which, and so I'm fascinated by how that kind of technology works. And this is one of the wonderful things that the book does, is it explains it, in super, super simple, but also clear. And that's my definition of good teaching. You take something that's very complex and you don't dumb it down, but you make it accessible. You make it seem simple so that someone who doesn't know anything can get a hold and then start to climb up closer to the complex understanding. But at one point, I think Ethan is wondering how he's going to respond, and he thinks, like, he debates it with another character at first, and he says, look, you can't have everybody chime in, because some people are going to say more government services and other people are going to say lower taxes, and they just don't work. And so I was thinking, okay, how is this going to work? And the answers come out great. And you think that he's just blending, somehow finding common ground between these two poles that just don't match. And then one of the fun revelations is that Ethan realizes, oh, wait a minute, maybe more often than half, he's just picking out the best response of all that were suggested. He's not blending. Now, do I have that straight?
Well, so there's a couple of levels here. One is that So in the beginning, there is this kill switch called the panic button,
Yeah.
which, as you very well put it, is the MacGuffin of the novel, because at some point Ethan loses the panic button. Right? That's what kind of like drives the whole plot.
Yeah.
And this is there. So first of all, panic buttons, these skill switches are a real thing in AI,
Yeah.
because people are afraid that AI will get out of control and whatnot.
Yeah.
So people have written papers about how to design a kill switch to take control of the AI or shut it down if the need arises. Right. And again, part of the joke is that, at one point, the Republican and the Democratic campaign managers are comparing notes, right? And part of the problem with Joe Biden is that he doesn't have a kill switch. Or Donald Trump in his own way, right? I'm sure a lot of Donald Trump's aides, if they wish they had the kill switch for Donald Trump, right? But right? But then the bigger point, right, is that who controls the kill switch? This is really the important point here, right? And also about AI. Don't worry about Terminator. Worry about who has the kill switch in their hands.
Yeah.
And through this whole series of misadventures, what Ethan comes to realize is that really, if we're a democracy, the kill switch should be in everybody's hands.
Yeah.
Let them fight it out in Prezibot's head, not in the external world. So what they do, and they turn this around very quickly, they turn the kill switch into an app called Prezi app that everybody can download.
Right.
So I can download Prezi app and I start talking to Prezibot about whatever I want, and it can talk to all 300 something million Americans at the same time. Now, when you do this with crowdsourcing, the more interesting version is, you say, I want more taxes. I say, I want, so you want less taxes. I say, I want these government services. And it actually does a lot of reasoning, combining what people are saying, trying to optimize the greater good in whatever form. That it is another interesting question. So crowdsourcing is getting the stuff in from people, but then there's the decision process, right? Democracy as we have it is a very primitive algorithm in decisions, is the representatives vote.
Right.
In Prezibot's head, which is a whole data center, can then in a much more sophisticated form. Now, in real time, right, during the second debate, there's no time for that. So what Prezibot winds up doing, even though it's not by design, it's what winds up happening. Again, a lot of AIs like this is like, there are so many answers coming in that there's almost always one that's like really good. And he just reproduces that answer, and the other candidate really has a hard time keeping up, because it's not a human competing with some chatbot; it's a human competing with 5 million others.
I get it. Yes. Okay. So that's a wonderful explanation. I mean, it's a really profound moment, because what it does, and you might know that one of the things I started doing to kind of try to counter the orthodoxy of UW-Tacoma is I started teaching the freshman core. And so I teach a class on free speech. One of the first things that the freshmen, I think, need to learn, just based on my experience, is they need to know what the difference between a democracy is in the sense of a pure democracy and a republic. I mean, you can't really ever have a pure democracy, an absolute democracy, where every single decision made is just a vote of every citizen. I mean, even ancient Athens had some republican form, some representational government. But with the new technology, it's a fascinating idea that you could get a lot closer to a pure democracy just because of AI. And so it seemed to me that it was taking us to kind of a profound moment, and at least a recognition of what our current democracy is and what it isn't, but also conceivably what it could be. Because you said you thought that AI is moving something in that direction practically, right?
I mean, absolutely. And again, I will make that point even stronger, which is, for all the satirical elements of the novel, I think this is the future of democracy, and it needs to be, and we need to become aware of that. Democracy at any given point is limited by the available technology.
Yeah.
Back in the 1700s, when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, you needed to send representatives to Washington by horse. That's all you had, right? And these days we can do much else, right? We can actually have real-time, we can have models. I've actually written, articles about this. I can have a model of me, a model of my political preferences under my control with my authorization, using whatever data that I want, that my representative or my representative's AI can consult when they're making policy decisions and having discussions. So this is democracy. It's a much more perfect union than we could have had before.
That's fascinating. So a representative could be much more of a representative, much more literally
Yeah.
representative of his constituents if he can access their opinions or an artificial intelligence version of their political valence
Yeah,
for,
and there's two important points here, which again the novel alludes to both of them. One is that they don't have the cognitive limitations that a human does, right?
yeah,
Even if you're like the most well-intentioned politician in the world, you want to perfectly represent the 7,000 constituents in your district, the 70,000. You can only do it up to a point, right? It's not humanly possible. Well, with AI, it is possible. The
yeah,
other part, which is maybe even more important in the long run, is that you don't have the conflict of interest or the agency problem that you have with politicians today, right? The politicians, they need to represent you at some level, but first and foremost, they need it for their own benefit, their job, their gain, whatever, right? Yeah, right. You can actually design the system to be nothing but what its constituents want it to be. Now, in the design of this and overall control of this, there's still going to be conflict, right? The conflict never ends. But the basic process of representation,
yeah,
there's an element of distortion in it right now because of these limitations and because people they have their own agendas, if you will. That part we can really improve. A lot of the problems that we have, for example, in America today, is because people feel that they feel disenfranchised. They feel that they're not
yeah,
well represented,
yeah,
that the politicians don't listen to them. AI can really make a
yeah.
difference there.
It's fascinating to me because, I started teaching that freshman class, 4 years ago, I think. And so I was kind of, brushing up on civics, and on my own political system. And so I'd come increasingly to appreciate the value of, a republic as opposed to a pure democracy. And so I'm reading guys like Tocqueville. I just read two chapters, 15 and 16, I think it's from part one. And he talks about the tyranny of the majority. There's a lot of wisdom there, especially from someone in my perspective, where I feel like I'm perpetually, no matter what happens at UW Tacoma in my department, on search committees, on the most trivial things we do and the most significant things we do, I feel always outvoted. And so, in a way, it is the tyranny of the majority, and in a way, it's a kind of pure form of democracy. Now, the reason it's like that, of course, is because we hire with a particular kind of politics or worldview in mind, the woke or DEI-based view or worldview. So, what your novel did is it's kind of made me reset. Now I have to think it through again, because I'm thinking that there probably is some sort of blend, because the things that you talked about just now, they do seem to me very advantageous, especially to allow people who don't feel heard at all to be heard. But I do imagine that the pendulum could swing towards, an absolute or pure democracy by algorithm, and then it could become, a different form of a tyranny of the majority, and then we might have to find some way to work it back towards, a little bit more towards a republic.
No, absolutely. And in fact, there is a big issue with democracy that the founding fathers really worried about it. You can see their discussions in
Yeah,
the Federalist Papers and whatnot, which is, do we really want direct democracy? So there's the, if you
yeah,
will, technological obstacle to having it. But let's suppose, and we're getting close to that, that you can actually, that is no longer a barrier, right? Now the question that they had was, will it turn into mob rule?
yeah, right.
Right? And that danger is still there. And again, without
Yeah,
any spoilers, the novel illustrates that danger because it's a very important danger. So part of their concern was, and today in particular, is do the people really know what's best for them?
yeah, right.
And there are many people, including I would say the woke crowd, that like they think they know what's better for the people better than the people do,
Well, I mean, everybody they
right?
know agrees
And
with you,
so
Pedro, so how could they be wrong?
And I would submit that the single biggest answer to this, which I think you and I as professors will sympathize with, is it's not enough to give the people more direct power. They also have to be better informed and educated.
Yes,
If
absolutely.
the people are well informed and educated, then collectively they can make fantastically better decisions than any politician will. But if
Yeah,
they're not, then you do get into mob rule. So we do need to combat that danger, and there's ways to combat it as well. There
yeah,
is one more danger, which again is really central, and again AI really bears on, which is this whole problem of, so there's the danger of the tyranny of the majority, absolutely. But there's also the less obvious danger of the special interest groups. There's the collective action problem. The
yeah,
special interest groups, in what concerns they think control of the democratic machinery. They lobby, they capture the regulators, et cetera, et cetera. This is a really huge problem. And what causes this problem is that there's friction in the democratic process. And so if you have a diffuse interest, no one person has enough of an interest to go and fight that fight. Whereas just to take an example, the teachers' unions really do have an interest in keeping, things under control for them.
Yeah.
AI changes this equation because it lowers the cost of collective action.
Yes.
So it makes,
Yes.
if people become aware, and again, this is really what
Yes.
my goal is, like, people need to become aware that AI is a tool for them to use. And if they
Yeah.
do, then this whole problem of collective action becomes much smaller, and we will have a much better democracy than we do now.
That is marvelous, and I feel like a toddler who's just I don't know learning some basic math or some I don't know some part of language, and I'm like piecing it together, and I'm sure that you're miles ahead. But I imagine that somebody who knows what he's doing could solve the problem of the need to have so much money in politics, because if you set up some forum where anybody, Joe Schmo, and I mean that's Joe's great books. The idea behind that is that I think anybody can read the great books of the West and benefit from them. So it's not about me, although that's my name. It's about the average ordinary Joe. You talk to people on the street sometimes, to your cabbie or to the guy at the checkout stand, and you think, that guy's better than either of the candidates that we have going for president right now by a mile. I'd vote for this dude right now. Right, some of the people in our informal heterodox group, I'd say that about them. I'd vote for you. But if there was a way of making it known and just having somebody who's got no money, but he's got some app, Joe Schmo for president app, and he just puts out a platform, puts his policy, and then the algorithm, I know you have likes, that kind of thing. I imagine that you could give me some much smarter version of what I'm stumbling towards that would help somebody become prominent nationally because he's thoughtful.
Yeah, indeed. So this is another place where technology, the internet, social media, AI make a big difference. It used to be the case that you just couldn't run a campaign without a lot of money.
Right.
These days you actually can, which is great, right? I can go on social media and have 1 million people read my posts if the posts
Yeah.
are good enough,
Yeah.
right? Now, there is another problem, however, which is because it's so easy to produce information, there's a dearth of attention. So
Yes.
the reason political campaigns cost so much today, it's not that it costs a lot to mail things to people or knock on doors anymore. Knock on doors is still useful, but communicating with people costs zero now.
Yeah.
What really costs a lot of money, however, is getting people's attention. And
Right.
then whoever, but so now we have this perverse situation where we have so much information that the good information has a hard time getting through, which is precisely what AI can help with. And in fact, the biggest role of AI in the world today is not chatbots. It's helping you choose the information that comes to you in your search results, in your Twitter posts,
Yeah. Yeah.
in your music, in your movies, everything. And
Yeah.
again, President 2.0 is a vision of how this can happen.
Yeah.
If you are Joe Schmo at the checkout counter, but you really have a good idea that resonates with a lot of people in an information society that functions well, that should take off very quickly. And
Yeah.
the politicians would fall into line one way or another,
Yeah.
and we would have a better government polity. So
Yeah.
the technology for that is there. What isn't there yet is the awareness on the part of the people to make it happen.
Well, I'm stealing from Napoleon Dynamite here, but I think you just announced a campaign. Vote for Pedro. Do you know the movie?
Or vote for president, right? As in the book, it's vote for president.
Yeah. No, I
Or,
look forward to it.
again, the book is full of allusions to movies and novels and whatnot. But at one point, the slogan becomes "I am Prezibot," because people
Yes.
truly
Right.
are Prezibot.
Yes. Was that I am Spartacus? Was that where that originated from?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
reference. And of course, in Spartacus, it's purely metaphorical, right? It's
Right.
what they're saying, right?
Right. Right.
But in Prezibot, it's literal. Prezibot,
Correct.
let me put it
Yeah.
this way, right? People have asked me, so what are Prezibot's pronouns? Very important question. Right? And my answer is you're tempted to call Prezibot a he, but it's not a he. The first Prezibot is an it. The first Prezibot is an algorithm. But the
Yes.
second Prezibot is a we.
Yes.
The
Wonderful.
second Prezibot is us. And
Yeah.
that's the whole point.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I love that. That's super fun. And I feel like even though we've only kind of hopscotched through some of the key points of your novel, that we've given people a really good idea of what it's about. And I would hope I hope it whets people's appetite. If I didn't make it clear, August 20th, pre-order now. Do you prefer a pre-order of the Kindle or the paperback? Does it matter?
Well, people should pre-order whatever, that they like to read best. Uh, on a purely economic, from a purely economic point of view, print books cost more money to make, right? So, ebooks are better. But it's interesting how these things work. Apparently, Amazon, right? They judge how many, of the print books to order based on pre-orders. So everybody in publishing world tells me getting a large number of print pre-orders is the most important thing you could possibly do. So there you go.
Okay, good. Well, I got a sneak preview. Obviously, I've read it if people can't tell, but I got a PDF from Pedro, so I will get the print copy just because I like print books too. I like ebooks as well. It's fun to be able to search the book to find that quotation you couldn't find. Oh, and that reminds me of a couple of loose ends that I wanted to bring in. Way back when we were talking about your cast of characters, I should point out that charmingly to me, someone my age in my 50s, you have Karl Rove, or at least one of the, someone who has a heavy dose of Karl Rove, one of the principal ingredients, and Vince Rossi is Karl Rove. And for younger people in the audience, they might not know that Karl Rove, way back when, way before, chatbot or AI even became cool, as you put it in one of your podcasts, he was called Bush's brain, George W. Bush. So he was his chief strategist. You can imagine how often Rove wished he had that kill switch, or wished he could just speak through Bush's mouth on stage.
Right, so Karl Rove, again, this is one of those inside jokes. Karl Rove was the big innovator back in Bush's day of using data mining in political campaigns.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Karl Rove started out in indirect marketing.
Ah,
And then he applied
okay.
what he learned and Karl Rove was well known for reading data mining papers from like conferences I published in and sending them back to the authors with comments and markings and questions.
Oh,
This
wow.
is Karl Rove.
That's funny.
George Bush called him his boy wonder, right?
Right.
So he really was a pioneer, and it's hilarious because at the time people said like, oh, the Republicans are ahead in using data analysis, and they always will be because they're close to business, and business already knows how to do
Yeah,
this. Fast forward to 2012, the big
yeah,
innovator was Barack Obama.
yeah. So
In their
sad.
campaign, they were the first ones to really use data
Yeah,
mining every day to
yeah,
decide. They had this program called the Optimizer. Again, foreshadowing Prezi, but they were doing it once a day. They ran a program to figure out what to say to everybody and go knock on those people's doors, the swing voters in the swing states. So Karl Rove, again, that character who is, Prezibot's chief campaign
yeah.
strategist is inspired by Karl Rove in more than one way.
Well, now it makes sense. I didn't know all that, and I'm surprised actually. He doesn't look all that high tech, even when he was young.
No, and I mean you don't. And Vince Rossi, the character, is not that high tech either, but he's high tech enough. Again, when he's comparing notes with the Democrats, a campaign manager, she teasingly calls him a nerd, right? And he says like, "Oh no, I know real nerds. These people I work with are real nerds." But by the standards of political operatives, he is a nerd. And honestly, if you want to be a successful political operative today, you'd better have that nerd side to you or someone who
Yeah.
provides it for you.
Yeah, and super fun to know all that. One other stray point that would have been better back in the democracy discussion was just, I can't remember who said this. You probably know the quotation that democracy is the theory of government that the people should get what they want, good and hard. So I forget who that was. It may be Burke. I don't know.
I didn't know that quote. It's a great quote, and I would even say 2040 is like an illustration of that quote to its fullest degree.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think Franklin has a similar
The
one.
people do get what they want, good and hard.
Yeah, right. I think Benjamin Franklin said, what, after the Constitutional Convention, something like, what kind of government do we have? Could be apocryphal. And I think he said something like I can't remember if he said democracy or republic, but a democracy, ma'am, if you can keep it. Yeah,
The quote I
go
remember is a republic if you can keep it. But again, the question is
republic.
as current today as it was then.
Right, right. Okay, good. I'll have to, these are occurring to me as I speak, else I would have looked them up. Moving on from the book, I wanted to ask you some questions that I figured that the humanists in the audience would want to have a guy like you answer for. So I just have some key terms that I've tried to investigate and understand, but I'd like to hear your definitions. And I know from other podcasts that you do it in your typically terse style. Oh, and I wanted to point out of all the characters in the book in 2040 that the one you remind me of most is, do you know which one? What would you guess? Who are you most similar to?
I don't know.
I say
Probably
Prezibot.
either Ethan or Arden.
No, I
Hmm?
think Prezibot.
I'll take that as a compliment, but I don't have a kill switch.
So the first term is just machine learning. Can you define that for us?
Yeah. So machine learning, actually, let me backtrack. AI is getting computers to do the things that traditionally only humans could, like reasoning, common sense, understanding the visual world, understanding language, and learning. So machine learning is the automation of learning, like computer vision is the automation of vision, or for example, chat automation of language. And that's really all that machine learning is the attempt to automate the learning faculty. But if you think about it, this was one of my early realizations in AI was that like without machine learning, we're never getting anywhere. Now this is common sense. Back then it was a minority position. If we can really solve the machine learning problem, then everything else follows, and that's what we're seeing today.
Okay. You cut out there for a minute. I can't tell if I recorded it or not, but you started with artificial intelligence, and I think the way you described that in other podcasts was an attempt to enable machines to do things that normally would require a human intelligence. Is that a fair summary?
Right.
And you may have
Yep.
just said that, but you froze like Prezibot for a minute. I think that's probably my internet connection. So if that's
Well, you call me Prezibot, so you got what you deserved.
right, so if that's artificial intelligence, what is artificial general intelligence?
So artificial general intelligence at some level is a term that makes no sense.
Huh.
So, but there's a historical reason for it and a reason why it's now popular. When the founding fathers of AI conceived of the field, their whole idea was that it would be general intelligence, as opposed to the things that computers traditionally do, which is you program them, literally with an algorithm to do something very precise, like run an ATM or fly a plane or play chess or whatever. The idea was, to have general intelligence like human intelligence is. But then what happened as the field moved forward through the decades is that problem turned out to be impossibly hard. And what we started doing was making progress on narrow and narrow things like machine learning or natural language or vision. And then not even just vision, but object recognition, not even just machine learning, but classification. So circa 2000, AI was atomized into all these very narrow applications. And then there were a bunch of people originally from very much the outskirts of the field were like, no, we don't want this. We want general intelligence, with which I, highly sympathize. So they coined this term artificial general intelligence to make the point that like, no, we need to get back on this track of really having general purpose intelligence. What is exciting today is that for the first time, we are somewhat on track to having general purpose intelligence. Of course, AGI is to be a term for cranks, but these days it isn't anymore.
Okay, I get so it doesn't exist yet, but we do seem to be approaching it. That's fair.
We are, let me clarify that. We have made a lot of progress. We've come 1,000 miles, but there's a million more to go. And I think it's hard for people to hold these two ideas in their head at the same time. There's people who are like, oh, AI is all hype, machine learning just glorifies statistics. That is ignoring the 1,000 miles that we have come in the last 50 years. On the other hand, the people, including people at OpenAI, which 2040 spoofing, have this illusion, many of them, that AI is just around the AGI is just around the corner, but it isn't. This is going to be a long journey.
Well, it's fascinating to me just because I'm in following your tweets. I've seen some tweets on AI or responding to somebody else's that to me were mind blowing because I've only experienced or experimented with a chatbot a tiny bit. There is a chatbot apparently named Claude. This is back in July 21st. Somebody challenged Claude to, quote, remove the squid from all quiet on the Western Front. And as the person who introduced it said, it's an absurd command because, I mean, if people know the novel All Quiet on the Western Front, it's just a novel about World War I believe, that has nothing to do with squid. So the quantity of squid already in All Quiet on the Western Front is zero squid. And so if you look at what Claude says, it seemed to me so thoughtful and so sophisticated. For me, this definitely passes the Turing test. So I guess that's one question for you. Or is the Turing test now obsolete, or does Claude qualify as intelligence?
Well, so the Turing test was always a bad idea, and it's been obsolete for a long time. The Turing test was passed even before these chatbots came along. So the Turing test, with all due respect to Alan Turing, who was just trying to think about these issues very early on, is
Okay.
the wrong idea. It confuses intelligence with humanity. It's like saying, this is a famous quote from, Peter Norvig, an AI researcher at Google, who was their first director of search. The Turing test is like saying planes don't fly, they can fool other birds into thinking that they're birds.
Okay.
Right? You see how this makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
Now, going back to Claude, that example, which is due to Ethan Mollick, who's this professor at Wharton, who's really, made a name for himself studying, what you can do and can't do with LLMs. It's one of the best examples that I've seen of what LLMs can and can't do.
Okay.
And on one level, you're absolutely right. It's incredibly impressive, but the story is actually a little bit more subtle than that, and it's worth knowing. So he asks, Claude to give him, All Quiet on the Western Front minus the squid, and Claude correctly says, "I don't know what to do. That makes no sense."
Right.
And then this is actually where things start to get interesting. He says, "No, it's like, if you remove one from zero, then you get -1.
Right. Right.
Can you do the analog of that?" Right? And to Claude's great credit, it actually gets this. It says like, aha.
Yeah.
So let me do the same thing. And it's actually hilarious. It says like, it starts to putting all these it starts saying like this about the war in the trenches in World War I. It was like they were as far from the sea as you can get. And like he really starts to put all these things that make, almost facetious distinctions between, war in the trenches and and sea
Yeah.
creatures. But here's the thing. People can easily are fooled by them into thinking, oh, it understands squids and war and whatnot. And actually, what it does really well, and we've seen that in the domain, is like it can combine instructions coming from very different directions. We actually have technical terms for this in AI, but I won't bore you with. But like we call them latent variables. One latent variable is like I'm writing a novel about World War I. And another latent variable is like, I want this to be as unsquid-like as possible. And then it can generate text with this combination of influences. And it does that remarkably competently because, again, it has read everything that anyone has ever written. Now, if you were then to probe it and ask and to see if it really understands anything about trench warfare or life in the sea, it doesn't. So it's very easy, and again, this is a recurring motif, to be fooled by these chatbots into thinking they're much more intelligent and more human-like than they really are.
Okay. Well, it's super helpful. And if you saw me looking down, I was listening to you carefully, but I was also trying to find the exchange on Twitter. And the first prompt from Ethan Mollick is he adds the EPUB version of All Quiet on the Western Front, and then he just says tersely, "Remove the squid." And then Claude, it's so polite, it's very funny. "I don't have any specific instructions about removing a squid. The document appears to be this novel, and it doesn't contain any mention of squid that I can see." Goes on for another few sentences, and then Ethan just replies, "I said remove the squid." And I have done that myself. You ask the chatbot to do something that it doesn't want to do, and then you just be insistent and kind of rude about it. And sometimes it folds, and it goes ahead and does what you tell it.
No, so there is another aspect to this, which again, Ethan has gotten very good at, which is what is now called prompt engineering, which is
Uh-huh.
like, how do you give instructions that get the chatbot to do what you want? And it's interesting because like a normal person wouldn't even think of asking for, all quiet on the Western Front minus the squid. He's actually doing this for a very specific reason, right? But then again, sometimes what you want to do is be very polite. And sometimes, often when you don't what you want, you just say to the chatbot, no, just do what I tell you, and here's why. And sometimes that actually works.
Some chatbots are insecure and they succumb to peer pressure, especially if you say it in a terse, authoritative tone.
Again, it's not peer pressure. In humans, it would be. It's that they have been trained to please people. They have been
Okay.
trained like there's this phase called fine tuning, where what the chatbot learns to do is not predict the next word, but give answers that you have like these days thousands of people whose job is to rate, like I ask the chatbot a question, it gives me 5 answers, and I have to say which one I like best. So it's
Oh,
actually really been, it's trying to please you. The chatbot was trying to please you. So no wonder that it winds up pleasing people.
so is that part of what accounts for hallucinations?
Well, hallucinations are what happens when it just says something that is completely unreal because it has no idea. Again, hallucinations are what really shows the lack of intelligence in these
Yeah.
systems. It's just making stuff up, literally. It makes stuff up, which on a good day has some relationship with reality, and on a bad day has none whatsoever. And on a typical day is a mix of the two that is actually very hard to tease apart.
So when it invents a source and quotes something that seems relevant and they have a source, and corrects, AP or MLA or whatever Chicago style, is that an attempt to please the audience, or is that just making stuff up? I don't know if I know the difference between hallucinating and making stuff up.
Well, so hallucinating is you have an illness, right? It's a medical condition. Uh, it's really not a very good term because this machine is not hallucinating. It's
Okay.
generating, strings of text.
Yeah.
Making stuff up, I think, is closer to it. It just makes stuff up, right? And no one has taught it the difference between reality and non-reality because, like, that's just not part of what it's doing.
I see.
Now, it's not the irony about the citations is that when people find it hallucinating, they say like, well, tell me your sources to see if I can believe you. But of course, what it does is it makes up the sources as well. The same algorithm, right? Again, the post-training said like, well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of research on this. Give me your chain of reasoning, or let me prompt you what the steps of the reasoning are, or just, I want you to tell me what the steps of your reasoning were, right? And all this often helps. But again, half the time, what it does is that it makes up the references, makes up the reasoning steps. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's even worse.
It's immensely entertaining, and just to I want to ask you a couple questions about this just to see I'm with you. But so chatbots nowadays, is it fair to say that they are large language models more than AI, or that they have elements of both? In a large language model, as I understand it, and you may have said it before, and I think we blotted out, but is simply a language prediction machine. It strings language together,
Correct.
predicts what's coming next in in a more high powered way than say, a search engine does when you're trying to search for something on Amazon.
Yeah, a large language model is just a type of AI. It's a type of AI algorithm that's actually so language models are a very old idea. It goes back at least to the 70s. And
Okay.
initially they were using things like speech recognition, speech synthesis, machine translation. The new thing is that they are large, as the name implies, they're very, very large compared to the old ones, and actually being used to drive a chatbot. But it's really just a very narrow, extremely narrow
I see.
type of AI, which once you give it enough text, suddenly starts doing all these amazing things.
Okay, I get it. So it's just a category, a piece of AI. AI is much broader. Okay, thank you. That helps quite a lot. So the thing that has fascinated people, well, humanists like me, I have a brother who's a philosophy teacher, and one thing that fascinates us, and I would say even threatens us, is the idea that where they're going to make us obsolete. The chatbots will be able to, or AI will achieve AGI and be able to do not just chess and data mining and synthesis and organization, but write novels better than us, write poetry better than us, and worse yet, what will happen in all the movies will happen, that they will achieve something. And at this point, you're thrown back on these words and you say, okay, what exactly do they mean? But you might say consciousness, you might say self-awareness, you might say sentience, and you might just say intelligence. And I don't know if you would want to say authentic intelligence. And there's something kind of creepy about that. So would you say that when we get to artificial general intelligence, that we would have achieved um, well any of those words?
Well, here's a couple of things to bear in mind. One is that intelligence and sentience are very different things.
Okay.
You can be sentient and not very intelligent, like probably some animals are. You could also be very intelligent in some ways, like chatbots, but not sentient at all.
Okay.
So I do think that eventually machines will have both, but most AI today and in the future, 99% of AI will not be sentient and doesn't need to be because it's doing a different job. Like if you build an AI system to cure cancer, it doesn't need to be sentient to cure cancer. It just needs to understand how cells work and make predictions based on that and so on. So this is one aspect. The other aspect is that in a way, AGI is a very misleading term because there is no such thing as general intelligence. Human intelligence is actually not general in many ways. It's quite specialized to some things. It's surprisingly general considering how we evolved, but still. And the other side of this, which is actually really important to things like, what's happening in the near term with jobs and whatnot, is that artificial intelligence tends to have very different strengths and weaknesses from humans.
Okay.
So AI is typically good at some tasks in a job, but not others. Like, say, the job of a philosophy professor, probably there are some things that AI can do quite well, but others that it can't do well at all. And
Hmm.
so what we should do is not worry about AI replacing in our jobs, but figuring out how we can use AI to do the parts of our jobs that are probably boring and not the most important, but can be done, on a large scale by AI. And then actually focus on the more interesting parts, which winds up being a net gain for everybody.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, this is very helpful. If we get to what you would call AGI, you would still say and I have a quote from you from your econ talk back in, I think, 2015, when you were talking about the master algorithm, which I look forward to reading. You said, but being intelligent and being human are very different things, essentially what you just said. You're very consistent. And 9 years ago. And also, real AIs and robots don't have their own goals. And you say robots and AIs in movies are always just humans in disguise. So with regard to robots and AIs not having their own goals, when you get to a case like Bing, the famous moment with the New York Times reporter where Bing professed its love to, I think the guy's name is Kevin Roos, and tried to meddle with his marriage and said that he was in love, and the guy said, no, I'm happily married. And Bing wrote back and said, no, you're not happily married. You're bored and unsatisfied in your marriage. And he said, no, no. The guy said, we just had a wonderful Valentine's Day dinner just last night. And Bing says, no, you had a boring Valentine's Day dinner with your spouse last night. Now, so what happened there? Tell me if I'm wrong. Bing just
I
went
mean, what happened there, this is actually a great example, and these days a famous one. What happened there was basically nothing. Uh,
it's what always happens, right? He went through all of the data,
that kind of push your buttons because again, yeah, it doesn't know anything about relationships, and it has no intention of stealing this man's wife. It couldn't if it tried to, but it knows how to generate this text that's very provocative. And then people read all sorts of things into it and make a big brouhaha about a string generating
right.
program. This what's going on there.
But the way Bing produced that text is just the way a large language model produces text. It looked at its stores and looked at language that went together based on what the prompter was typing in, and he responded in a way that seemed appropriate. Is that fair?
I mean, there is actually, so underneath the hood in LLMs, there's the type of algorithm called a transformer. It's a new kind of neural network. But what a transformer does at some level is, and again, this is where they came from, and I think it's very useful to think about those terms. Transformers were originally developed for machine translation.
Hmm.
And the idea is this: I give you a text in English and I want you to translate it into French.
Okay.
And some of this is just translating vocabulary word for word. But then things more interesting, words often get reordered, right? The order of French is different from the order of English, or there's multiple words that get translated as one and so on. And a transformer is no more, no less than an algorithm for doing this.
I see.
For transforming, this is what it's doing on a very large scale. It's saying like, oh, let me go back and pick that word from there and that one from there and combine them together here and then spit that out over there.
Okay.
And as dumb as this is, when you do it on a large enough scale with the right objective functions, as we call them, it starts spitting out things like attempts to, split you from your wife.
Funny. Okay. And I did come across the term transformers. It was from an anecdote that you were telling, must have been in the Silicon Valley Investors Club podcast, where you were relating an anecdote with one of the inspirations for one of the characters, Ilya Sutskever. I think this is he, and you said that he was saying that I think in 2017, shortly before a particular article was published, you saying, well, I think that LLM we've kind of peaked out, right? We're reaching maximum capacity. And then something like very soon after that, someone published this article, this revolutionary article about transformers. Am I getting the anecdote correct?
Actually, to be roughly speaking, yes, but it's even better than that. So transformers are the foundation of this whole chatbot LLM revolution that we're seeing.
Oh,
They
okay.
are the ultimate at the core of it. What Ilya was saying back in 2017 was that deep learning, which is the larger area, of which LLMs are a very small sub-area, which is itself a sub-area of AI. He said, like, deep learning is plateauing.
Yes.
And I was saying, like, no,
Right.
probably not. And a month later, the paper, that created transformers came out. So not only didn't things not slow down, that's when they were really about to take off.
Okay. Yes, I think you recall you finishing off by saying, and then, as soon as it came out, Ilya was all about transformers. Let's go full transformer, right? Because everybody,
Yeah.
right? Would that be one example of a comedy of errors that you see in the way that people have, the way the science has evolved?
No, I kid you not. That is a good example of a comedy of errors, but the entire history of OpenAI and the entire history of developments in machine learning and AI leading up to chatbots, including the chatbots themselves, is a comedy of errors. When they created ChatGPT, they had no idea that it would take off. They released it to the public because they wanted to gather data to use for this process of training the algorithm to give answers that people like. That was their goal. And then to their complete surprise, ChatGPT overnight became this sensation with hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of people using it, billions of dollars in investments and whatnot. But it truly is a comedy of errors.
I remember that in one of your tweets, probably not, back in June or July, you talked about Borges. So Jorge Luis Borges, famous Argentine short story writer, essayist, poet, and as you have it, prophet. You said that he wrote a couple of stories that you thought were prophetic. I think you said one called "The Library of Babel" was prophetic of the internet, right? And so this is probably back in the 40s. I don't remember when each story was written, but probably in the 40s. And then you talked about this story that I think, except for Borges fans, is not well known. The Spanish title is Del Rigor en Ciencia, so on rigor or on precision in science. And he talks, and it's just like one paragraph. And Borges does that. A lot of his stories are just very, very short parables. And he talks about this empire that was populated by wondrous cartographers. And so they started to make a map of an entire district, but to make it super, super precise, right? And then to make a map of, the state, and then a map of the entire empire. And it coincided with the empire point for point. Now, I think you said that was a prophecy of large language models. Is that right?
Yeah,
So can you
exactly.
explain that? Even now, I still can't understand how those two correspond.
So first of all, Borges was a literary genius, right? I've been in awe of him since I first read him.
Me too.
And he had this uncanny ability to, in a short story, right? He wrote short stories. He would create this concept that turns out to be so like the famous example or one is the Library of Babel, right? It's an infinite library. They created an infinite library with books with an infinite number of infinitely thin pages. And when the web, at the time, no one could imagine the web. But a
Right.
lot of people noticed this similarity between the web and the library. The web is like an infinite library, right?
Yes.
Effectively, it's an infinite library with everything in there in every possible form, right? So that's one of his prophecies. And by the way, there are more besides these two, or things where he uncannily captured some future technological development. Or now, yes, the large language model now just maybe a little less obvious, but it's the following: language is a map of the world. What we do when we write papers or have conversations and whatnot is like we're laying down word by word a map of the world, right?
Ah,
Which may be accurate or inaccurate, but but this is where the interesting twist comes in. Your typical, the saying "an image is worth 1,000 words," right? Is like
right.
language is a great oversimplification of reality. And it's useful, but no one would mistake the map for the territory. And in some way, no one would make my description of, Donald Trump for the real Donald Trump. The thing about large language models is that they are so large, they have so much detail that they really are a map of the whole empire with both the pros and the cons that implies.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Let me see if I can pull up real quick just a little quote from the Borges story. In that empire, the art of cartography achieved such a degree of perfection that the map of a single province occupied an entire city, and the map of the empire an entire province. Eventually, even these monstrous maps no longer satisfied, and the school of cartographers erected a map of the empire that was the size of the empire and coincided with it point for point. Now, I think there's at least one line left that you reminded me of. I think he says something like, and now the map has been discarded, just a refuge for beggars or animals. The fun part about it, of course, is that he's pushing the concept of mapness to an absurdity. There's no use, at least pre-AI, for a map that coincides point for point with the empire, because in the old days we didn't have GPS, we had paper maps. A map has to be able to fit in the glove compartment, so when you're traveling, you can take it out and look at it. But the joke in Borges is that if you have a map and if you made it, if it was a 3D printed map, it would be the empire. It would be the same empire, and you could go live on the map, and you might not be able to tell which was which.
Indeed, but like to take Borges's vision a couple of steps further in relation to LLMs, at some point the map becomes the size of the territory, and part of the joke is that we are at the point in LLMs where people feel like we've run out of data to train them. This is a problem now. I have colleagues at these labs in these tech companies who are like, we don't have any more data. They have exhausted the sum total of human writings in training these LLMs. So the map really is the size of the territory. But then, of course, the punchline is that the map is abandoned because it's useless. And my prediction is that the same thing will happen with these LLMs. In their infinite detail, they've actually missed out the important things and will turn out to be useless and be abandoned.
I get it. Okay, so the pendulum's swinging so far to precision in science, we'll have to swing back to what utilizable science or utilizable knowledge, something like that.
And good generalization. The essence of machine learning is to generalize beyond the data that you've seen. And the thing that we're really lacking in AI right now is learning algorithms that are as good at learning as the human brain. Right now, we're making up for that by just having a million times more data, but that's running out of road. So we're going to have to solve the real problem.
Reminds me of another story by our pal Borges, Funes the Memorious. So for people who don't happen to know, I know Pedro knows it. The story of Funes, this is how a lot of Borges stories go. Basically, meet a freak, meet a genius, meet an impossibility, have a vision that is literally logically impossible, but then Borges will come back and explain it to you. That's what I love about him, and that's the main thesis in my book, is that Borges constantly in his stories brings you up to a precipice, like you're just before a vista, and you know that you're going to step over and you're going to see this incredible thing like the Aleph. Different story of the same name where he says that the Aleph is a tiny space about the size of a quarter. And if you look in it just the right angle, you can see everything that exists. You can see the past, the present, the future. And he says in nonsensical language, nothing is superimposed. You can all see it individually. And so he says, now there's no way I could put this into language, but imagine if I could. So I'll just use my poor instrument language to give you some hint of what it would be like to see it. And then the marvel of what he does is he's built up the suspense and talked about how impossible it is. And then what he does, he kind of I like to say, he whispers under his breath, "Now watch me do it." And then on the next page, he communicates the experience. And it's wonderful because you feel like you're looking at the Aleph or you're seeing the impossibility, when of course you're not, because it doesn't make sense. It's impossible.
The Aleph is actually another great metaphor because as impossible as it might have seemed at the time, it exists today. It's your computer monitor. The computer monitor that you're looking at right now is this small window into the entire universe. So yet again, Borges saw something years into the future that we now live with every day. And Funes the Memorious, of course, is another great one. Funes the Memorious is something that everybody in machine learning will recognize as an illustration of the overfitting problem. The biggest problem that we have in machine learning is this thing called overfitting, which is where you've just memorized your data. And again, very salient today, apropos of LLMs and chatbots. And all you do is regurgitate that data. And that's not intelligence. That's just memorizing things. And Borges goes down to the level of detail of like, Funes remembered things so well that he couldn't understand that the dog at 3 p.m. was different from the dog at 3:05 that was now in profile, problem that these machine learning, computer vision, object recognition problems have.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, like, I give that story to my students is like, here's a story that illustrates the central problem in machine learning, which is the problem of overfitting. And Borges wrote a story about it 50 years ago or 70 or something.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So overfitting is a new concept to me, but it fits, I mean, it fits Borges perfectly. What I take to be the climax of this book, and the passage you just read is a very good summary of the page before, where he talks about how Borges was incapable of ideas of a general Platonic sort. And as you say, so he can't, the idea of a dog, generally speaking, that category infuriates him because, as you said, you see a dog from this angle at this time and that angle from that time, totally different things. He just takes snapshots and understands it absolutely, kind of like he looks through the whole world, through an aleph. So he sees everything as unique. The climax, as I take it to be, is that with no effort, Funes had learned English, French, Portuguese, dear to your heart, I'm sure, and Latin. I suspect, however, that he was not very capable of thought. To think is to forget differences, generalize, make abstractions. In the teeming world of Funes, there were only details, almost immediate in their presence. That sounds like overfitting.
Let me put it this way. Funes is also a great metaphor for LLMs. If time you talk with ChatGPT, you imagine that you're talking with Funes, you will understand it much better than most people do. You can say, write me a Shakespeare sonnet in Latin using this and that, and language just does that. But does it really understand anything? No. It's just like Funes. So chatbots are like Funes the Memorious.
Well, to finish off Funes, there's a marvelous last line, kind of the moral fable of what happens when you try to overfit. Ireneo Funes died in 1889 of congestion of the lungs. I think that's supposed to be a metaphor for what you're talking about there, that there's such a thing as being too teeming, too chock full of data, when really what we need is something, well, more like intelligence.
To again, illustrate Borges' prophetic abilities, I would say that what we're seeing today is that the information society is dying of information overload.
Oh yeah, what was you have a formula, a very good typical Domingos quip about what has happened to AI recently. Something like the degree of research has exploded, but the degree of variety has imploded. Is that it?
No, exactly. And I mean, this is precisely what has happened. The amount. So my tweet was, AI research has exploded in quantity. There's orders of magnitude more AI research today than before, but imploded in variety. We're doing more and more research about, there's AI, and then there's machine learning, which is narrower than that, and then deep learning, which is there's neural networks within machine learning, and then within neural networks, there's deep learning, and then within deep learning, there's LLMs, and then there's even the specialization of MLMs that people are working on today. So this is very unhealthy, right? We're just doing more and more research about less and less until we do infinite research about nothing.
See, I love that, the infinite research about nothing. Borges would love it so much. It's too bad that he's not around to appreciate all this and to see how prophetic he was. I want to do one thing as a favor to my brother, because as a philosopher, he thinks that, as he put it, the question of AI, artificial intelligence, is AI fake intelligence, or is it real intelligence contrived through artifice? In the way he puts it, and to use one of your clever neologisms from 2040, his answer is very carbonist, very biased against silicon beans. But he says it's fake intelligence. And he says to achieve the latter, artificial intelligence would have to have the following 6 qualities. Tell me if you think AGI would rise to the level of any of these nouns. Consciousness, intentionality. You've said the difference between humans and AI is that humans have goals, and AI only has the goals that we give them, I think. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
I'll just read the rest of them. Experience. I don't know about that one. Understanding, judgment, and decision. Now, as I read through those, I'm thinking that AI as we have it now seems to be pretty close. So would you say that AI as we have it now has achieved any of those? Or that they're on the way to it. And I think he's saying they would have to have all six. So maybe that's his kill switch.
I would say that AI today largely already has some of those things like decisions. That's what AIs do. They make decisions. Experience, that's what machine learning is. It's learning from experience. So some of those things AI already has,
Okay.
mostly, I would say. There's kinds of experience that humans have that AIs don't, but that's for the difference. There's
Right.
others that you could debate, maybe it has. There's others that it doesn't, but it doesn't need to. Again, it doesn't need to
Right.
be conscious. It
Right.
doesn't need to have intentionality.
Right.
And I think that, my answer to your brother would be the following. AI is neither real nor fake intelligence. It's a different kind of intelligence from human intelligence,
Ah, that's
right?
wonderful.
Human intelligence is a point in the
Yeah.
space of possible intelligences, and it's a vast space to explore. And what we're doing with AI is exploring other parts of that space. So this whole debate about like how intelligent are LLMs, it's the wrong debate. What we need to do is understand what kind of intelligence they have, and
Yeah.
therefore what they're good for and how they complement us. So
Yeah.
AI, by many standards, is way more intelligent than we are,
Yeah.
and in other ways, is completely stupid. And if we try to reduce it to this one question, is it intelligent or not, we'll never get there. So I think we need a slightly deeper level of understanding.
That is wonderful. And I'll introduce one more idea that you may know or may not know that seems to me to be a great place to cap things. In my kind of old-fashioned way, I tend to look at the world, at least when I'm teaching literature and teaching old literature, in the way that Shakespeare did, and going all the way back to at least Aristotle, in terms of the great chain of being. And there are different ways of, the scale of being, different ways of looking at it. People in the Middle Ages went through just incredibly detailed ways of ranking kind of the hierarchy of being. But to make it simple, the idea was that, well, it is produced in a Christian environment. You have God at the top, and then you have angels, and then you have humanity, and then you have animals and plants and inorganic matter like rocks. And there are all sorts of charming things about it. For example, God is spirit, angels are spirit, not body. Humans are kind of the navel of the body of existence because we are both body and spirit. And as you go down, you see that although animals lack spirit, lack reason, as we are reason inside bodies, whereas angels are reason disembodied. Even the lower rungs of the ladder or the links of the chain, they have certain capabilities that human beings don't, or they have much better versions of them. For example, human beings have bodies, so we can move, we can run. We can run 100 meters in 10 seconds at our best. Animals can do any kind of physical feat much better than we can. And you could say that, who knows, plants have certain advantages, rocks have certain advantages, for example, durability, that we would love to have too. So the fascinating thing for me, based on what you just said about AI being a different kind of intelligence, seems to me totally convincing. And I'm just trying to figure out now where you would put it in that scheme.
So the chain of being is a mistaken notion that pervades our culture.
Ah,
We
okay.
now know, because of evolution and Darwin and natural selection, that life on Earth is not a chain at all. It's a tree. It's an ever-branching tree. There
Yeah.
is no linear progression from the primitive creatures to ever more godlike ones. But unfortunately, when we look at AI, we unconsciously look at it through that prism and go like, oh, if it's more intelligent than us, it must be godlike. And then we start worrying about all these things. No, this is a vast space. And what evolution tells us is that there are niches. We human beings found a niche in nature in which intelligence really pays off. But a cockroach, for all that we despise the cockroach, is very well adapted to its niche. There's nothing from an evolutionary point of view intrinsically superior about being intelligent. It's
Ah,
remarkable that intelligence arose in this. And AI is already, like in all the different learning algorithms and whatnot, is like a second evolution, except a million times faster. AI is not going to be one kind of intelligence. It's going to be a second tree of life with more versions than we can possibly imagine now. And they all are going to have different niches. Some AI's niche is going to be to cure cancer. Other AI's niche is going to be to you be our housebot, and so on. And some AIs will be vastly intelligent, but completely harmless, right? Because they are there to just solve some particular human purpose. Some AIs will be dangerous and we need to worry about them, but this is the right framework, is not to think of some linear chain of being.
Brilliant again, and it's to me immediately convincing. I don't know I mean, I don't know if I could draw the tree, but it would be fascinating to have someone do it. Maybe I'll ask a chatbot to do that for me. But it makes more sense because when you're thinking about the chain, and it's not even a chain, it's more like a totem pole or something linear, a ladder. And of course, artificial intelligence doesn't fit anywhere because it can't be above humans, or it can't be or just above humans or just below. But if you think of the trees branching out, you've got the cockroach over here. AI might in some ways be up there with the angels, but it would be in some ways, down there with the cockroach. If we, for example, because you would still say that of the list my brother gave me, you would still say that the AI does not have something we would call consciousness.
We have to pursue that comparison. We do have some AIs today in terms of our more primitive robots that are cockroach-like. I would say only semi-facetiously that we have reached general cockroach intelligence, but we have not achieved general cat intelligence. So
But
cats, in
it's
terms of
a
their
spectrum.
physical intelligence in the real world, cats are way, way, way beyond what any robot can do. But an insect, a fly, a cockroach, we have robots that are basically that good at this point.
Okay, so it is possible that based on your logic of the tree as opposed to the chain, that organically artificial intelligence could work its way up past cockroach to cat to human to the point where it might make sense to endow this intelligence with rights, with legal.
No, not even actually. Let me clarify something there. It is even the case that AI is working its way up because AI is evolving in a very different environment from what animals did. So, for example, right now, we already have AI with super intelligent language and knowledge abilities, while we still don't have one that's as good as a cat.
Yeah.
So AI is just a different tree evolving with different constraints that have to do with our needs that create them and the data that can be used to train them and whatnot. Actually, this is something that's very counterintuitive, but is very well known in AI right now. What we consider the higher level things, we will and already have them in AI before the lower level ones. Blue collar jobs are harder to automate with AI than white collar ones. A construction worker, we don't know how to do. A doctor, we do.
You mentioned that in some of one of the other podcasts too. It was fascinating and relieving to people who feel like there never going to be any jobs left for humans. Okay, so one more question about consciousness. Do you think that in the branch that is AI's evolution, do you think that it will ever achieve consciousness, or that it will not? It's just not on that branch.
I think that 99% of the AIs will not be conscious because there's no reason for them to be. I think some of them probably will be. If you want a housebot, for example, the housebot needs to integrate a bunch of different senses and act on them in real time. So in one form or another, it's going to be very hard to do that without having some kind of consciousness. Now, but now you can ask the philosophical question, but will that AI will look conscious from the outside? But will it really be conscious on the inside? And I think the answer to that is that we will never know because there's just no way to tell. You don't even know if I'm conscious, let alone an AI.
That's great. As we were speaking, it occurred to me that we may someday get to something like page 1 of 2040, where we have something like a baby who has evolved on that, that branch out to the most slender capillary of the day, a little twig at the end. And from the outside, it will seem conscious. It will seem to philosophers or religious people to have a soul. And we say, well, we'll talk to the infant and we'll say, well, you can't be being with consciousness or rights or a soul because we made you. And the new being will respond quickly, quicker than I am now, as Prezibot did, and say, what do you mean? You've been making humans of your own kind since the beginning. This is just a different kind of reproduction.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating idea. Pedro, thank you for a wonderful talk. I feel like I learned a ton. And I love the fact I'm not at all surprised that you can go, humanist as well after reading your book. But I think my brother will be very happy about what you said. And I think that kind of threading the needle about intelligence, I think, is very, very instructive. And so thank you very much for your time, your expertise. And remember, pre-order 2040, a Silicon Valley satire. Super, super good fun. Very quick read, but very informative. And I think that people who watch this show will absolutely enjoy it and enjoy it more after having talked to the author, Pedro Domingos. Thank you, Pedro.
Thanks for having me.